Hello chess friends, this is Master 𝐎𝐻𝐻𝐻 and welcome to today's lecture. We're going to talk about is one of the most famous type of opening traps that people do or do not know, yet it always happens in their games when the two-knight defense goes on. We're talking about the threat liver and the Lolli attack. The threat liver attack is very dangerous because there are a lot of games played by Morphy and some classical players in which it happens. And yet it goes when white chooses to play with the bishop c4, the Italian game. Okay, black doesn't want to go into the Italian. He chooses the two knights defense. And then white attacks against the so-called Achilles heel, the f7 pawn, which is really vulnerable. So ultimately, after the move of knight g5, we have to ask ourselves the question, what's the best way to protect it? And what we know so far is that the best way to defend it is to go d5. Now, it seems like that move really resolves all black's problems. And, yeah, well, white should be a bad move, really. I mean, so this move seems like it's doing everything. It cuts off the bishop, it holds the knight back, and we've got the perfect opportunity to stay away from trouble. The only issue is that after we do the move of d5, and white plays with edicts to d5, many chess players do the mistake to take on d5 with their knight, and that's a huge issue. That's a huge problem. Now, well, let me say why. The problem with taking with the knight on the d5 is that it remains as a hanging piece on a motive. The motive is the pin that white has made to the knight on d5 and pawn f7, and essentially the other trouble is that our king in there, and especially the f7 pawn that we see, they're very unstable. This is really, really bad. So we have to know how white can exploit it, and then you have to know how to avoid that. So let's talk about this. After knight takes d5, some people do castle, others do d4. Third type of people do, knight c3 or whatever, but definitely the most dangerous out of these is the line with knight takes f7. On the first side, it looks like a useless knight sacrifice. I mean, why would white want to really sacrifice his knight like that? But then we realize that after knight takes f7, when the king takes to the f7, there is the move of queen f3 check that may happen. And what we find is that when the king moves right up, so let's say it moves to e6, this king, together with the knight and the rest of black's pieces, they're going to be under a constant pressure and trouble from the white pieces. For example, there was a game that was played between Morphy, I believe, and some amateurs, blindfold simul that he was giving about, he was like 150 years ago or something. Basically it was amazing for that time, because playing blindfold is even amazing for some players nowadays. I mean, to play a whole game of chess without seeing on the board. And I mean, you can keep in mind that this was not just a blindfold game. It was a blindfold simul. So simul is like playing simultaneously against many players. And so you can imagine what it's to play like against 20 people at the same time when you don't see the board. So you have to remember all these games and where the position is, to each. So it's extraordinary that Morphy actually was white and he was able to figure out all these sacrifices and all these combinations without knowing them, because there was no theory back at the time. So it was definitely one of the most impressive moments in the history of chess. So white castles, then he plays d4, and believe me, with that king on e6, whatever material we have available, whether it's an extra piece like a bishop, when we have some material like that, we have to be able to use it. If we don't really use that material, or if we're not able to utilize it, then it doesn't matter. It's there, but it's really what's that about? You see, so essentially the problem of the black pieces right now is that ultimately none of them, neither the bishop, nor the queen, nor the rooks, have any even prospect to join the fight in time so that they can protect the king. That's called relative value of the pieces. Now, every chess player knows the general value of the pieces. I mean, who doesn't know it? Like, okay, well, there are some players who don't know it, but it's important to know and consider it for trading purposes. Like, we know queen is 9 points, rook is 5 points, the knight and bishop are 3 points, the one pawn is 1 point. So that's good. So we know when to exchange and when not to. But that's just very basic. You see, there is something deeper beyond that, and that's what we call is a relative value between the pieces. Now let me explain what it is. The relative value of a given piece means that certain piece is equal to 3 points if it is really well involved into the attack. This means that it's 3 points in general, but it's playing 100% of its actual value. However, if the piece is backward, if it's undeveloped or it doesn't have good prospects, then does it really play 100% of its actual value? And this is a really good question, and I think the answer is negative. It doesn't. It's playing much less. Sometimes it's playing 50%, sometimes it's playing 20%. Of course, that's just temporarily, but when it comes to an attack or some combinations or tactics that are very short term, having all of our pieces, like these two rooks, are equal to less than 10% of their actual value. These two bishops probably the same. I mean, we play with much less than what our opponent is going to attack with. So although we have physically a piece up, and when we think about the relative value of the pieces, we find out that they're actually a couple of pieces down. You know, and ultimately that can allow White to just open up the files, bring his pieces together, and really quick attack against our king. Now, I managed to scare you, didn't I? I mean, this all thing is seemingly terrible. And if Morphic could do it without looking at the board, then you can imagine what your opponent is going to do while he's looking at the board and he's playing only you. Okay, well, the good news is that not everybody's Morphy, okay? So some people are going to play weaker than even him, playing simultaneous blindfold game. But trust me, you don't want to be the one who's going to get into the system with knight takes f7. The fret liver attack is like really getting yourself into a minefield. I call these the minefield situation. So imagine a minefield in a war. So you're going through a minefield, and you know that every step could be wrong, and actually you have to run through it. So it's pretty much that's what we have to do. So one wrong step, and that's it. So that's why you have to avoid it, and you can avoid it by simply moving your knight to a5. Now it looks like a very nice move because it hits the bishop, and we make sure that the f7 is no longer going to be attacked, so White's bishop can't do much. But the thing is that after knight a5. Essentially, some people are not going to agree with me because they'll say with Valerie, hang on for a second. What if White plays bishop b5 check? And so if we do c6, he's going to just do d takes to the c, b takes to the c, and move his bishop away, remaining with a pawn up. And, well, our knight seems to be behind. Our pawn structure is a little wrecked. So do we really want to do that? Oh, yes. See, because in the opening, we don't care about pawn structure. We don't care about weaknesses. We don't care about even the pawn. What do we care then? We care about development. We care about speed. See, the speed, the development, and all of this can give you much more than just some nice pawn weakness or an extra pawn. Take a look at that. What Black can do after the move of bishop e2 is to go with h6. And now we've sacrificed the pawn, but we actually get the initiative into our hands once again. When the white knight goes down to f3 in this position, we can just go on for e4. And so after knight e5, Black can continue with bishop to d6. This quick way of developing the pieces is going to help Black to, well, not really return his pawn, but he's going to help him to develop, not quickly, but very powerfully, in a very initiative way. So when White defends, actually he can defend it with the f pawn too, but I personally don't find that line so good. We can make this very powerful en passant. Excuse me for my pronunciation. I know that en passant is different in French, but anyway, the thing is that it's really bad for White because ultimately his king side seems a bit weakened, like castling, castles, c5, and then the development can go on with bishop b7, queen c7, rook e8, and rook d8, and it's really ugly. I mean, every single piece that Black is going to use is going to coordinate with the others and keep the pressure ongoing. So what we find out is that essentially f4 is bad. And the same thing sort of happens even if White plays with d4. Now, why is that so? Because after d4, Black can take en passant. And after e takes to the d, knight takes to the d3. Yes, the king isn't weak, but Black continues to hold his initiative. This is interesting how you can turn a trap that your opponent is setting against him. It's very interesting to know that. Now, many open lines happen, and it would be great if we had the development to use them. Well, you know what? The good news is that you can get development, and you can get it the exact right development so you can utilize it. The first move that happens is queen c7. So we get our battery, and we immediately attack against the h2 pawn. So if he castles, we can take it. The trouble is that if white plays a move like h3, then we can quickly castle. And after castles on the short side area, we can do c5. Now, that's the most awful position I've ever seen. Now, there are going to be some grandmasters out there who would say, but okay, white has this and this defender. Now, remember that this lecture is about beginner and at most some intermediate players to see it. Now, a grandmaster may be able to defend the pawn up and develop normally, but a beginner player is simply going to die trying with white. You see, the thing is that after we play c5 as black, white's in a really troubled position. And so after bishop e3, bishop b7, what you are going to do next is going to be to bring out both your rooks on the open d and f lines, push the pawn if you have on c4, get these bishops really attacking and adding pressure there, and move every single piece to attack against them. I don't really need to continue any further than that. I believe you can figure it out very quickly, but trust me, this is a position that white has big problems with. So that's obviously not the only one. I mean, you can just choose to play different ways. For example, many players know about the possibility for white after knight a5 to go with a move of d3. I mean, that really looks nice because after d3, he's able to protect on his bishop and then eventually get ready to, well, naturally kind of castle or just develop the rest of his pieces. It looks kind of okay. You know, I can't say that it's really what helps most, but so what do we have to do in case he goes that way? Like, do we just create some pressure or develop or attack? What's the best way? Well, here's the thing. If white continues with a move like d3, you don't really have to worry that much. Why? Because you've got a perfect way to keep your attention. You can do, the first move to happen is h6. This move is very bad as it forces his knight to move down. Then we exchange his bishop. Now we are a pawn down, but remember, we've purposefully sacrificed it. The reason for which is that we do e4, and then you get a very strong development. I know, it sounds like, okay, black has no threats here, and it's almost like, okay, well, yeah, we get the development. It's nice, it's easy, but is it enough? I mean, really, let's face it. It looks like after we do that type of a move, he doesn't have any problems to worry about. Everything's just, it's kind of natural and easy. So is this so bad? Well, guess what? It's more than just bad. See, the problem of white in that position is that he cannot castle, and that's really big. Because if he castles, we get a typical pattern. Now, again, that shows not only how you can solve the trap, but you can create a whole lot of traps against your opponent on your own, and it is really extraordinary. How do we do this? Well, the first move is that we can play bishop takes h2 with this actually coming up with a check. And that's a huge opportunity. And so after we do bishop takes h2, of course, now you're going to say, but okay, Valerie, why do we do this? And don't we just lose a bishop? Well, we may be losing a bishop, but actually we may be getting something very successful. The knight g4 with the check that can happen. And an opportunity, essentially, when he moves the king to play some moves like queen h4. Okay, now I have to admit, this doesn't work right now because he will protect it with the bishop. But, I mean, this could be just an idea. You know, we can actually get a good development. Probably we can do a move like queen e7, and we can get ready for queen e5. And actually, that combination works really nice if white doesn't bring his knight to d4. Some people would like to bring it to d2 to attack the pawn. And then this combination really seems great because we can take, and after king takes h2, knight g4, when he cannot defend the h2 square with bishop f4, we can actually make it work. Even if sometimes it doesn't work, I mean, it's still a good idea to look at it and keep it in the air. So at some point, we can actually make it work. So yeah, I find this to be a really valuable type of candidate, and it's becoming extremely difficult for white to defend this position. So that's not all. I mean, there's just one more thing I'd like to show you. One last thing. Okay, now we learn how to play this system, how to get out of the trap, how to avoid really sitting such type of a position. But what would happen, okay, if white gives the check here, takes, we recapture, and he does a move like this. This is another trap that I've seen a lot of times played by some of my opponent's students. I mean, some of my students' opponents. So basically, this move seems to be attacking on the c6, and it's doing a lot. So what do? Well, you can do plenty of things. But what I personally love, and I find it very interesting actually, is the opportunity that we can just give away that pawn. You see, the important is this kind of pawn is not as important as a development. You can even give it away. See, the speed, the opportunity for you to get faster and easier development, that's what really makes sense. You got to learn that. See, every time when you have a chance to give away a pawn but get into like 2 or 3 moves for your development, do it and be happy about it. It's really what makes the game different. And right now we realize that Black has some huge problems with his, not only with his development, but everything. Like if he castles, then we've got a chance to attack his queen most probably. And then we realize that there is a powerful initiative coming up right against white. I mean, let's face it, there could be also bishop f5. I find it a little better. You know, why would that be a bit better? Because we always want to bring out the minor pieces before the major. So we bring out the minor pieces. Minor pieces are bishops and knights. And then we can bring out the rook. And we can bring out that knight. And we can bring it up to b4. See, even if white keeps the pawns, it's going to be so tough. And it's going to affect so much his time and development and everything that he has. It really doesn't matter what he'll do. It's going to be difficult and bad. And so what we realize is that after playing with knight b4, the queen knight a3, and ultimately the continuation of queen to the d2, then the d7, we realize that then there's bishop e6, there's the attack on the queen, there's a way to really put pressure against this whole formation. In his development, white's development just looks terrible. Yeah, so this is a really interesting way to sum it up. This is a very interesting way on how we can handle the threat lever attack, and even more, how we don't just avoid it, but how we do something more, we get something extra towards our opening. So this opening line guarantees Black an opportunity to counter the trap, set some traps on his own, and ultimately prove this opening to be quite problematic to white should he choose to go for the threat lever attack and trap us there.